Hello, listeners. Welcome to the Africa Learning Together series podcast. My name is Jacqueline Jere-Folotia, the Senior Foundational Learning Expert at the Association for the Development of Education in Africa, and I am your host for this podcast. Today's podcast is the first we are recording after the Foundational Learning Exchange, commonly known as the FLEX, that took place in Kigali, Rwanda from November 11th to 13th. Partners rallied together to sponsor and organize this event, namely the Ministry of Education, Rwanda, UNICEF, the World Bank, Hempel Foundation, New Globe, USAID, and ADEA. With over 22 ministers that attended the event, 12 heads of delegation from 34 African countries, and over 500 participants with over 19 sessions, Flex 2024 focused on strategies that will ensure committed action towards improving learning outcomes in foundational learning on the continent. The event itself was nothing short of amazing. It was both enriching and motivating and culminated in a declaration for action, which will guide actions in foundational learning in 2025. Our discussion today is more of a reflection on Flex 2024, and we have a special guest from the Hempel Foundation who will share her reflections on the event and also provide some inspirations for Flex 2025. And in case you didn't know, Flex 2025 is being hosted by Malawi. So do keep an eye on ADEA's social media posts for more information on this. So joining our discussion today is Rosa Robinson, who is the Senior Manager, Education Partnerships at Hempel Foundation. Rosa, we are delighted to have you on today. Welcome to the podcast. And before we proceed, I would like to hand over to you to please tell us a bit about yourself and the Hempel Foundation.
Thank you very much, Jackie, for that kind introduction and for welcoming me to take part in this ADEA podcast series. I am Rosa Robinson, Senior Manager of the Education Partnerships at the Hempel Foundation. And to those unfamiliar with the Hempel Foundation, I could share that it is a commercial foundation dedicated to making a positive difference, in particular in the spaces of global education and biodiversity. The Hempel Foundation is the majority owner of the Hempel Group, a world-leading supplier of coatings. But more importantly for the conversation that we'll be engaging in today is that the foundation is a committed philanthropist within the fields of education and biodiversity.
Thank you for that introduction, Rosa. And, it's good to know about all of the work that the Hempel Foundation is doing. So straight to my first question. Could you please share some of the foundation's perspectives on Africa's learning crisis and how it is uniting everyone around this cause?
Absolutely, Jackie, and thank you for sharing such a relevant question with us to kickstart the podcast. The Hempel Foundation have been supporting global education for more than a decade, and our current education strategy is very much formed by the recognition of the global learning crisis. Going back to 2019, before the pandemic hit, foundational learning was already at the core of the global education strategy of the Hempel Foundation. But realizing the impact of the COVID pandemic only strengthened the concern and the investments in the education space of the Hempel Foundation. The very high level of global learning poverty is a signal that many education systems, despite their progress in recent decades in terms of improving access to schooling, have yet to deliver on learning. And that is the very call to action for us as a philanthropic foundation. Reading through the State of Global Learning Poverty report from 2022, which is a core document guiding our investments and engagements, we realize that in low and middle income countries, an estimated 70% of children are living in learning poverty. We see a great need to address the learning crisis, recognizing it as one of the major challenges of our time in order to safeguard the new generations of children and youth. As a philanthropic foundation, we in particular see that investing in education is critical for preventing future declines in productivity, in income, and in well being. And we also see it as a crucial element for promoting social stability, peace, and security. We see it as a global challenge that requires both strong collective efforts, but equally strong support for national education initiatives. And that is what we hope to support as a foundation. We also see the global learning crisis as an opportunity, and not least when we look at the continent of Africa. The case for return of investment when tackling the learning crisis is very clear. Research that shows that each additional year of quality primary education can increase an individual's future earnings by 10%. And we know that in low income countries, this return can be as high as 20%. The data really speaks a clear and compelling language, serving as the foundation for our commitment to promoting foundational learning across the African continent and beyond. And you asked, Jackie, how are we doing our part or seeking to unite actors around the cause? If you ask about how we are supporting convening of key actors to address and tackle the learning crisis, I could highlight a couple of avenues for how we try to do so. First of all, our education strategy is based on careful partner selection. The Hempel Foundation partners with specialized education solution providers. And being a Hempel Foundation partner is based on thorough due diligence and assessment before any partnership. The core component of our assessment when onboarding new partners is whether and how potential partners prioritize and engage in cross-sector collaboration, and with governments as the core as a core partner in such collaborations. Secondly, talking about our approach to uniting actors, I would mention that any education intervention which is supported by the Hempel Foundation rests on a thorough stakeholder analysis and thorough understanding and provision of an engagement plan, which accommodates close stakeholder consultations in the design phase, in the implementation phase, and also in the closeout, and very importantly, the final learning phase. As a very concrete example, most inception phase workshops and steering committees have government representation for solid anchoring of interventions, as well as connections for learnings across entire public school system based on Hempel Foundation supported solutions. And of course, I would also need to highlight the Flex, which you so kindly introduced, Jackie, as part of the opening for this podcast. I could not speak to how we at the Hempel Foundation seek to support the uniting of actors around the cause of foundational learning without highlighting our support to the two foundational learning exchanges in Freetown, Sierra Leone and Kigali, Rwanda over the past 2 years.
Great. Thank you so much, Raza, for sharing, some of the foundation's perspectives and also, just telling us about, some of the work that you do in terms of supporting partners and, events like the Flex. So, first of all, it was great to meet you at the Flex. I know you were there, and it was a great opportunity to meet and interact with you in person. I know that we had shared, a couple of reflections about the event itself, but I just wanted you to, basically just talk to us about your major takeaways from the interactions that took place at the Flex with ministers and country delegations. Just to share your thoughts on this.
Thank you. And I mean, I must express my appreciation for being taken back to the conference in Kigali. And also, I really like to make use of this occasion to share appreciation for the ADEA team's contribution to the event overall, and also for the excellent opportunities, Jackie, to engage with you and the ADEA team in Kigali. So thank you very much for that. Asking about my reflections from Flex, I'm more than happy to share a couple. At the Hempel Foundation, we really see the foundational learning exchange as an education conference of incredibly high value. Incredibly high value, both in terms of the agenda as well as the key actors represented there. Firstly, looking at the agenda, foundational learning is about getting the very foundation of the entire education system in place. It's about allowing all children to gain the basic building blocks for learning, literacy, numeracy, and social emotional skills, and to acquire those skills as a ticket to access further education and a path to lifelong learning. As we at the foundation see foundational learning as the education, as the very basis of the education system, we strongly appreciate the opportunity to dedicate an entire exchange event such as Flex to this core topic. And secondly, speaking to the group of actors convened at Flex, I believe those were of crucial importance. The foundation, the Hempel Foundation, we pledged our support to the conference out of the recognition of the importance of having a strong government-led event on the African continent. And we did so specifically with a view to support the Rwandan government in hosting the second Flex, and really to see the event centered around the engagement and exchange across African government delegations. So those two, the topic and the stakeholders represented at the event combined, is really what stands out for us, and what represents the event as having incredibly high value. And I believe, Jackie, you also asked about my takeaways, and I'm glad to share three particular takeaways from the conference. First of all, I left the conference immensely encouraged, and I was in particular encouraged to hear education ministers' accounts from the various stages on how governments increasingly seek to prioritize foundational learning. And I would say that I was even more encouraged by the corridor conversations and remarks on how that type of active engagement with peers from across the continent and exposure to learning data at Flex was perceived as allowing government delegations renewed energy and renewed commitment to the cause for promoting foundational learning for all. Indeed, very encouraging to sense this when walking the corridors and when sitting in the various sessions that were offered at Flex. And secondly, seeing the foundational learning exchange established as an annual event based on a shared understanding of the great value that it brings about was indeed positive. Those of us who were at the event saw that the last speaker on stage during the third day of the conference, the distinguished Malawian Minister of Education, took stage and indeed ensured that the conference ended on a high note, as Malawi was announced as the host for the 2025 Foundational Learning Exchange to take place in Lilongwe. And not least, as we at the Hempel Foundation have supported both the 2023 Flex in Freetown as well as this year's Flex, we see the establishment of Flex as an annually recurring event, as a crucial marker for increased attention to the challenges and opportunities that lies in prioritizing and investing in foundational learning. And having an annual event will not only allow the continuous knowledge sharing across education systems on the continent, but will also allow an annual stock taking of commitments and actions.
Thanks, Rosa, for sharing, some of your major takeaways and, speaking to us a bit about, the Hempel Foundation's focus around, working with countries and supporting those activities that promote foundational learning. So you did mention in your explanation about, the declaration that was announced at the end of the conference. It was a major, outcome document, and I know that a lot of partners were definitely looking forward to that, and countries as well. So countries are now in the process of signing the declaration, which was adopted at the Flex. How can we ensure to meet, the target of, 2035 to eliminate learning poverty, through this declaration? Just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Excellent, Jackie. Thank you. And I must say, I believe that is a core question that all of us are taking with us from the event, and a question that many will be paying close attention to in the time to come. The declaration that concluded the Flex event established government's commitment to 5 overall actions. 1, to enhance inter-country collaboration and knowledge exchange. 2, to scale evidence-based approaches to improve learning outcomes. 3, to prioritize high-quality data, evidence, and accountability mechanisms. 4, to accelerate impact with efficient use of resources. And 5, to boost coordination among foundational learning partners at the country level. While all 5 commitments resonate strongly with how we see our role and contribution to global education under our education strategy, I would like to take this podcast as an opportunity to highlight, in particular, 2 of the ambitions that are shared. Ambitions for prioritizing high quality data, evidence, and accountability mechanisms, as well as to accelerate impact with the use, with efficient use of resources available. In a reality where resources for education are limited, addressing the learning crisis is not solely about attracting additional resources. It is very much about utilizing existing resources efficiently and investing in those interventions that we know work. Data and evidence that were presented at Flex provide a strong pathwork to understanding effective strategies and to enable decision making to direct resources and policy actions towards those proven basic interventions. And for us, as a representative of the philanthropic donor community, we recognize our role in supporting that investments in education are guided by data and evidence, and closely aligned with the priorities set by governments. And I mention that because I would really like to take the opportunity on this point of the declaration adopted at Flex to highlight the Foundational Learning Action Tracker, which was developed in partnership between UNICEF and the Hempel Foundation. The Foundational Learning Action Tracker speaks specifically to these 2 ambitions or commitments coming out of Flex. The Foundational Learning Action Tracker is built on the RAPID framework. And as many listeners of the podcast will be aware, the Global Coalition for Foundational Learning, which was founded back in 2022, developed the RAPID framework really to establish or provide support for countries to drive accelerated action on foundational learning. And as part of the coalition's work, experts worked on developing the framework, which outlines those key actions that are needed to advance foundational learning outcomes. And I was very happy to see the RAPID framework and the Foundational Learning Action Tracker well highlighted at Flex, as well as the support for the commitment to action on foundational learning, which emphasizes evidence-based policies and practical implementation of the framework. At Flex, we had the opportunity to zoom in on the 2024 data for Africa, which is offered by the Foundational Learning Action Tracker. This was presented as part of the plenary session and also highlighted at several breakout sessions during the 3-day conference. The action tracker was developed to monitor countries' progress on efforts for foundational learning. It was developed in 2023, and this year offered the second year of specific data for progress on the African continent. The data that was shared was shared in a context of both highlighting what are the positive markers, the good news, so to speak, while also being very clear on where there is still work to be done. The good news when analyzing the 2024 data for Africa is that governments in Africa are tracking action at scale to address foundational learning challenges, and that findings from the report indicate that nearly 3/4 of African governments are collecting data to ensure that every child remains in school. We also learned from the data shared that about 2/3 of countries are using assessment data to inform education policy and planning, and that almost 80% are setting benchmarks for literacy and numeracy in early grade curriculum. And while these efforts illustrates countries' commitments to advance progress on foundational learning, it was also made clear that significant gaps remain. Some of the key data that was shared was that fewer than 10% of countries on the continents are implementing targeted instruction as a critical approach that tailors support for students' learning levels. And it was also shared that a concerning 20% of countries are taking actions on all the 5 rapid dimensions, which are critical to supporting foundational learning. And highlighted among those was ensuring that every child in the early grades has a personal textbook, conducting annual literacy and numeracy assessments in the early grades, and implementing evidence-based foundational learning programs at scale. So to try to sum up my answer to your question, I would say that key actions for any government is to further commit to investing in and prioritizing foundational learning based on the RAPID framework and in consultation with the Foundational Learning Action Tracker as a guiding tool for national policy and as a year-on-year yardstick for measuring progress.
Great. Thanks again for sharing, some of the highlights for highlighting, I think, the 5 commitments that I included in the declaration, but also speaking to us, about the FL Action Tracker. I think this is really important, to have and for countries to take on and implement. Thanks also for sharing, some of the findings. I think these findings are obviously important because they are data driven, and they then feed into the recommendations around what we know about what's happening in foundational learning and what needs to happen next. So thank you so much for that, Rosa. So as you've indicated, the Hempel Foundation obviously does a lot of work in education, and you have a plan to reach 1 million children with learning interventions by 2030. Could you just give us some highlights around, progress around this goal? So what progress have you made so far, and do you see any linkages with the 2035 goal in education?
Thank you for this helpful question, which allows me to shed a bit of light on the education strategy of the Hempel Foundation, and in particular the goal that we've set to reach 1 million children with learning interventions by 2030. We made the commitment to directly reach 1 million children through our partnerships with a view to inspire others and also to serve as an overarching goalpost for our work. However, what we hope to do is to have impact way beyond that number and to accelerate change for also for learners that don't directly benefit from the interventions we fund. I think it's a conundrum for any foundation or organization working in education where to set the target. To what extent is it meaningful to set such a target? And those are indeed conversations that we would also engage in. So maybe I could give a little bit of context around that figure and tell you a bit about how the foundation operates to create impact in the foundational learning space. What we do is we support specialized education organizations in accelerating delivery of learning approaches at country level and also initiatives at regional or global level that strengthen the knowledge and capacity of governments to advance policy in foundational learning. And this twofold approach builds on the assumption that, firstly, specialized education organizations play such a pivotal role in driving continuous improvements in public education systems. And secondly, that governments have the role as duty bearers and potential champions of entire education systems. And while governments faces resource constraints and in many cases limited capacity to assess and adapt and scale evidence-based innovative learning interventions in the education systems, the key to quality learning for all really lies in government commitment and ability to act. So when we say that we specifically target a number of children, those would be through the interventions that are directly funded by the Hempel Foundation. But what we hope to see is scaling of those solutions that are cost efficient and high impact for entire national school systems. That way, having impact way beyond the learners directly involved in the interventions. I wanted to share, if all right, a little bit on our philanthropic strategy, which is guiding our education portfolio. It is built on the assumption that while high-performing organizations are delivering effective learning approaches at smaller scale, they need support in accelerating their work, for instance, through further refinement and expansion of approaches, adaptation to particular contexts, and engagement and access with governments to really understand how to bridge the gap between a small scale intervention with a potential national scale scaling. And at the same time, we see scaling and long-term sustainability of any learning approach is dependent on the knowledge and capacity of governments to improve delivery of foundational learning. And we aim to both strengthen the supply of high quality, cost efficient learning approaches, while at the same time supporting initiatives that are aimed at strengthening the demand for such approaches from the government side. So we indeed see close linkages between the core purpose of Flex as a basis for government exchange and the 2035 target, and for our role in supporting foundational learning globally and in particular on the African continent.
Wonderful insights, Rosa. Thank you for that. So I think one of the central points around, the flex was really discussions around scaling, um, obviously in line with the theme of the conference, um, which basically was, moving together from commitments to scale. And in discussing scaling, we were focusing mainly on, scaling interventions that work to improve foundational learning outcomes. So from your perspective, are there innovations you consider promising to make a difference in improving learning outcomes?
Thank you, and that is such a tough question, and I would very much like to share that with our partners. To be honest, Jackie, because I think they speak so well for each specific cost efficient intervention that has scaling potential. And while I can't invite all of our partners to come on this podcast, I can do my own attempt to sort of to to condense or to highlight some of the initiatives that we see in our portfolio that really do work and have significant scaling potential. Across our portfolio of partnerships, and I think I should maybe mention that our partnerships are covering the African continent as well as South Asia. We have in-country partnerships in countries characterized by high levels of learning poverty, and all partnership, as I previously mentioned, are with highly specialized organizations in the foundational learning space. If I should highlight some of the initiatives from our portfolio, I would sort of group them in four categories. And the first one I would say is initiatives that are closely focused on improving teaching quality. That would be teacher training, so equipping teachers with skills to deliver foundational learning effectively, especially in the areas of literacy and numeracy, as well as supportive coaching. So providing ongoing mentoring, classroom support for teachers to really refine their methods. So those initiatives would be we would see many initiatives in our portfolio with successful high impact that prioritize improving teaching quality in specific. And then I would also need to mention aligning instruction with learning levels, teaching at the right level, tailored instruction to to match students' actual learning levels rather than age or grade, as well as remedial education programs that offer support for students who have fallen behind in basic skills. That would be another grouping of interventions that we see having high impact and high potential for scale. And then I would also mention community and parental engagement. Parental support programs that empower parents to reinforce learning at home through awareness and training and engagement through other means, as well as community-based learning, where you would involve local volunteers or organizations in more or less formal education sessions. And then lastly, as the fourth point, should I highlight cost-efficient interventions, I would also need to speak to policy and systems strengthening. And at the systems level, I could highlight three elements. One would be supporting data-driven decision-making, making use of assessments to identify learning gaps and guiding interventions. The second would be supporting funding priorities for prioritizing foundational learning in education budgets and in policies. And the third one would be accountability mechanisms, ensuring transparent and regular evaluations of programs with a view to improve learning and to further fine-tune priorities and investments. Yes, I think those would be what I would highlight in terms of high impact and high scaling potential across our portfolio.
Great insights, Rosa. And I think that, highlighting these really gives us a general sense also of, what, the Hempel Foundation sees as, interventions that could definitely, make a difference in foundational learning. And, I totally agree with you, when you speak about the teacher quality to deliver foundational learning and, coaching for teachers, and also aligning teaching to the learning levels. And, also including important stakeholders like the community as well as parental engagement, but also highlighting that at the systems level, it is important that, there is some system strengthening to support foundational learning. We're almost coming to the end of our discussion, but I wanted to ask you, what your thoughts are around, what countries should be doing. So between now and 2035, what do you think countries and partners should be doing, and how can Hempel Foundation support that work around foundational learning?
Thank you for a good question. I would say to round off our exchange. Also a very big question. I think it's much easier to speak to what we can do as a foundation than to provide guidance for countries or other partners as we approach 2035. But if I should choose just one point of recommendation for countries and partners between now and 2035, I would circle back to the point I made on the foundational learning action tracker. I would very much encourage decision makers as well as technical specialists to consult their country specific data and make use of the guidance and tools that is inherent in the package developed as part of the foundational learning action tracker, and use that to inform education budgets, how they're prioritized, and how foundational learning is promoted. And of course, I would also highly encourage attendance at Flex 2025, a conference that we hope to be a supporting partner of here from the Hempel Foundation, and an occasion for connecting with so many of the key stakeholders that are crucial for reaching the 2035 commitments.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rosa. I mean, this discussion has been, definitely enlightening, enriching, informative. I now know more about Hempel Foundation than I did before, and I'm sure our listeners do as well. So thank you for joining us today and sharing your reflections from Flex 2024 and, your thoughts around Flex 2025. I am confident that, as a foundation, you will continue to provide support as you've done for the two previous Flex events. So thanks for enlightening us on the work that the foundation is doing through its various initiatives to improve foundational learning on the continent. And we hope that countries and stakeholders in education and all our listeners will find information from this podcast, really, really helpful and useful. And I would like to encourage, our listeners to please visit the foundation's website to learn more, about their work in education and, the various initiatives that they are supporting. So to all our listeners, thank you, thank you, thank you for always tuning into our podcast. And from ADEA, we would like to, wish you all a prosperous 2025, wishing you good health and productivity in all of your activities for 2025. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening, and have a great day.